lectures on plant nutrition and soils. So let's just first start talking about soils. Soils, of course, provide support for the plant. That is, the root system is going to be down within the soil, holding the plant upright. They also provide water that the plant will take up via transpiration, the transpiration process that we've been talking about. And they provide nutrients. Most of these nutrients are what we call the essential elements. The essential elements are just nutrients that the plant needs for either functioning, for growth, for developments of fruits. But in general, there are things that the plant has to have. And we can kind of divide those into what we call macro and micronutrients. So I gave you a handout that looks like this, and it provides you with the idea of macronutrients, which are up here, and micronutrients. Now, many of you have probably bought fertilizers, and it usually says NPK, N for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, and K for potassium. So these three would be the main ones that you see on all fertilizers. Calcium and magnesium are also often provided. Sometimes they're provided in a separate form called lime. And then in Florida soils, we oftentimes don't have a whole lot of sulfur, so sometimes people will add sulfur or amend the soil with sulfur as well. So these are what they call the macronutrients. They're what needed. They are the nutrients that are needed in the largest amounts. And a small amount are called micros or minors, you might have seen on a fertilizer bag. These are things that are needed in a smaller amount, but if you're growing crops or something like that, you could deplete the soils of these. Or if you have poor soils like we do in Florida, you might actually have some of these things missing, but you can see, you've probably heard of some of these, like iron, copper, manganese, zinc, etc., boron, chlorine, which we wouldn't normally think about. And if you water with municipal water, of course, that has chlorine in it, but in the natural world, there might not be a lot of it there. So anyway, these are what we call micronutrients. Some of these nutrients are what we call phloem mobile. What that means is it can move in the phloem. Remember that the water from the xylem will go over into the phloem, and if it moves within the phloem with the sugars, it's called phloem mobile. So this is NPK, that is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and magnesium are phloem mobile. If you have a deficiency in any one of these, you're likely to see this in the older leaves. And that is because it's going to move out of the leaves or be circulated within the phloem, and usually the new leaves are taking the materials for growth and development and so forth, because it's taking sugars and it's going to move with the sugars to the newer leaves. So then that means the older leaves are being depleted of that. The phloem immobile means that it's not really moving in the phloem very frequently. Things like boron, iron, and calcium, and you would see a deficiency in these in the newer leaves. All right. Soils are formed via a process called weathering. So if you think about rocks, and this, you might have seen this more out west than actually in Florida, because we have sedimentary rock. But if you see big rocks falling down, they break into smaller rocks, and then over time they break into even smaller rocks. This form is called weathering, and you can have weathering by just gravity, that is things falling and breaking, or you can have wind or water moving over the rocks and breaking down the materials. There are three groups of rocks. They're called igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Igneous is coming from the inside of the earth, so like molten rock. Sedimentary is like rock that is laid down, that is by sediments moving. In a lot of cases, sedimentary rock like limestone, for example, is coral reefs, old coral reefs that have now turned into rock. But it could also be like sandstone, which is a bunch of sand sediments that over time and pressure have turned into rock. And then you have metamorphic, and that is time and pressure on these sedimentary rocks, usually, making them into a even harder type of rock. So for example, limestone could become marble. So soils are also influenced by the environment. one thing is it's influenced by the things that are growing on top of it. That's adding organic materials to the top. And that is making what we call the first horizon, or the first layer of soil in the soil. And this is called the humic layer, or the A horizon. And then the sublayers are can be formed by either materials moving down through the soil, or by just the sediment that it is on. Let's say, for example, in Florida, we have a lot of sandy soils, and then it's influenced by the materials that are laid in it from the top. So then you have basically sand in the bottom and stuff like organics and things like that being added from the top, and those are making up the horizons. So let's just real quick, in different environments you might have different kinds of what we call soil profiles. This is talking about a coniferous forest. This means like a pine forest. It may have a humic layer in the top, and then down below it's going to have maybe a more sandy layer, and maybe even a layer below that that might have some rocks or so forth mixed in with it. Or you could have deciduous trees that usually has more of an A horizon, and then sometimes it will have some water holding capacity to its B horizon, and then the C horizon, of course, is going to be whatever rock it was formed from, or sediments. And grasslands really oftentimes really have a lot of humic. This is because there's a lot of death of the grass and a lot of organics being added back. Deciduous trees lose their leaves in the winter, so a lot of leaves being added back, less so in a coniferous forest. So this is just kind of showing you how the environment or the things that are growing on the soil might influence the soils themselves. Okay, there's another thing, is something that we call nutrient cycling. So almost all the nutrients that we were talking about, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, whatever, would go through some kind of cycle. Now this picture is supposed to be a squirrel. I don't know if you can see his little eyes there. Anyway, this is the nitrogen cycle. You don't have to memorize this per se, but I would like you to just kind of see, sort of go through this with me just to understand how a cycle might work. And that is, usually there's some kind of assimilation in an ecosystem. So this would be like the food web. And then through either decomposition of dead organisms or waste products, there's going to be nitrogen, in this case, entering into the soil. So that might be via urine, or it could be just the proteins of the breakdown of the muscles of the organism that are going in there, or the breakdown of plant material. Now there are groups of bacteria that do what they call ammonification. And this is taking the nitrogen that is in the materials and breaking it down into ammonia, and then it will dissolve in the soil water and make ammonium. And then there's something called nitrification. This is another group of bacteria that will take this ammonium, or actually it could use ammonia too, and turn that into nitrite, and then later nitrate. Nitrite, by the way, is poisonous to soils, poisonous to plants, and in very watery conditions, nitrite might build up, because what you need to make nitrate is oxygen. So we have to have oxygen within the soil in order for the nitrate to form, but nitrate is the chief nutrient that is found in the soil that is taken up by plants and then passing through the food web. So this is the main loop right here. Other parts of the nitrogen cycle, and this is common in other cycles as well, is some of it's lost to sediments. So may end up in sedimentary rock, for example. And some of it might be lost to another process. In this case, it's called denitrification. In this case, if an organism doesn't have enough oxygen, it'll use the oxygen off a nitrate, and it will release then nitrogen gas into the air. Now, nitrogen gas in the air can then be taken up by nitrogen-fixing plants, and nitrogen-fixing plants use nitrogen from the air and make either ammonia, nitrate, whatever, to use in their bodies, or it could just return it back to the soil, so it could actually go this way as well. So that's a nitrogen cycle. Phosphorus cycle would be similar. You can even do a cycle for water, for example. All right, one last thing is that if you look at the soil body, the makeup of the soil body is about 50-50 solid to pore space. The pore space, I always think of it as kind of like those blue balls in the in a play gym at like one of the, like, I don't know, McDonald's or something. The space between the blue balls is the pore space. The blue balls themselves are actually the solids. So solids of the soil are what we usually think of as soil. Those are the mineral components. That is the breakdown of rock, the small particles that make the made from the breakdown of rock, or the organics that are being added from the top. Usually it's about 45 to 5% sort of makeup. And then the other 50% is that pore space, which is either filled with air or water, and this varies. In other words, if it fills up with water, there's less air, and vice versa. All right.